Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before I get started, I would like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space. Today is part of our Culture Champion series, and our Culture Champion of the day is Dan McFall from MobileLabs. Dan, thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Yep. So Dan McFall, I'm the president and CEO of MobileLabs. We are an enterprise software business focused on helping really big brands you've heard of, folks, major banks, telecommunication companies, accelerate the testing and development of their mobile applications. So we're a technology provider based out of Atlanta, started here in Atlanta. We're about 8 years old.
Awesome. Well, I have developed enough applications without testing to know that no testing is bad, right? and testing is quite complicated, so you guys get to simplify that for a lot of organizations, is my understanding.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. So, I mean, our big piece is to help them take DevOps processes around mobile applications, things they've been doing for web and desktop for years that are broken in mobile, and we fix that for them, essentially by making it possible to insert real mobile devices back into their infrastructure. Is basically the basis of our technology.
Awesome. Yeah, so before we get into MobileLabs, I'm going to kind of take you back before your current role, find out a little bit about the company cultures that you're in, and have you share some experiences. So as far as experiences go, what is one really great culture experience that you had that you wanted to carry into MobileLabs?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So MobileLabs is my first true startup. I mean, I was there pre-revenue, pre-product, but I came out of an organization that was interesting because it was a European company that was basically starting up operations in the United States, and I was like employee number 9 for their U.S. business. So in a way, it was fun because we got to do all the startup things, but not have to worry about money,
Nice.
which was very nice. So there was good and bad about that culture, and a lot of lessons learned there. And actually, the person I followed out of that company into MobileLabs is what really turned culture around for me. So we were a technology business, heavily focused in complex technologies around optimization and things of that nature. And you had a very, very lot of smart people, but they didn't know how to be customer facing. And the person became my mentor, who came in and really accelerated that business, brought in the notion of really just the mind switch of we focus about our customers. And it's a little thing, I always will remember this, was we don't say nice things about our customers. In this organization, when he came in and joined, he said, we kind of tend to refer to them as stupid or all those things, or they're not smart enough to use our software. And just a little shift to say, we say nice things about our customers. We think about them because they are the lifeblood of this business. They are the oxygen, if you will. To watch us turn around from a company that was struggling, that over 3 years became the largest business unit to generate revenue of any of them in a company that was 30 years old, and we were basically a 5-year-old business unit, all off of that switch of culture, is something that stuck with me for a very, very long time, which is basically to remember, if you have any customer facing, that customers are the lifeblood. Yeah, they can be frustrating. We've all seen Clerks. What's the worst part of the job? The customers. They can be frustrating, but the fact of the matter is, it's why we have a business. They're who generate the energy around our company. So to think of them in a positive manner, to take that cultural shift and see it immediately pay dividends, to see sales increase, to see satisfaction increase, revenue increase, all of those types of things are something I will always remember and carry forward with me into running both MobileLabs but future businesses.
Yeah, I've definitely been in engineering organizations that had that same kind of verbiage around culture, or around, customers, where, they're worried about everything was the customer's fault, right? Internally. Now, of course, they never said that to a customer, but you could get those undertones where it's like, oh, well, they just can't use it right, or they can't do this. And, oftentimes you actually get a video of what they're doing and realize, well, oh no, something was actually broken.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this weird, concept around how they treat them or how they talk about customers on the back end. So I love flipping it around and really taking that concept of, they are maybe right, or, there's ways that we can help them, or looking at it through a very positive lens, giving them the benefit of the doubt and knowing they're the lifeblood, because that's a mindset shift for sure.
It's a major mindset shift. And what it also does is it just allows you to then embrace things like nuance and context and start adopting that both internally and externally. And what we learned was it even then helped customers when they're having, this was a complex software, they were big, long implementation cycles. So even helping them within their own discussions internally around the complexities, and we're all a team and we're all working together, it just made everything easier. It just got, it got the contentiousness sometimes out of the relationship. It made us more transparent and open with them, and it made it a partnership. And, sometimes, unfortunately, some of those things when you go out to culture now, they're partners and we want to partner with you. It can, you have to make it not rote. You have to make it not just call and response, if you will. Pavlovian, I guess, is the term I'm looking for. But it does matter. It really is, it's ingrained when you realize they are paying you to solve a problem, and your job is to create value for them, and then you value them in that, then they're a value to you. Then you think about it in a different way. And once again, and I think then the proof was in the pudding. I mean, like I said, just instant turnaround in the ability to acquire customers, to retain customers, all of the key metrics started to increase.
Yeah, you mentioned the word partner, and I've always had this interesting relationship with the concept of a partner in relation to clients and customers, because early on in starting my last company, my CRM company, I had people come to me and say, well, we're looking for a partner, right? And then if you ask them and said, well, what does that look like for you? What is a partner? What does that mean to you? It was really hard for some organizations to define that, to put some bounds around it and say, well, what is a partner? Or, clients that you'd been working with for a long time that, were having certain challenges. Well, we're really looking for a partner. What does that mean? Yeah. So it's interesting to get people to define that. And I know I've had some weird conversations where it's like, oh, well, they want, money off their bill.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, I'm seeing that you're linking, like, you don't like what you're paying to being a partner.
Right.
Like, what's the link there? So yeah, I've definitely gone through the partner challenge of figuring out, like, what is a good partner for us? What is a good partner for our clients? How do we define that and make sure that it's a great relationship?
Exactly. And part of that, if you're really going to partner, then when I think of it culturally, or the abilities, sometimes you have to have the right to tell them they're incorrect, and they have to have the right to tell you you're incorrect. It goes to that point about valuing each other and trying to, think about your customers more respectfully, or your prospective customers more respectfully. But part of that sometimes is to say in an appropriate way, no, you brought us in because we're professionals, and here's something we don't agree with, or your expectation might be wrong. But they also then have to have the same right to do it back with you. That, to me, is a partnership. It's a relationship. Yeah. It's when we refer to our spouse as a partner, or anything of that nature, or our partner in general. That's what it's got to mean. It's got to have some emotional content that goes with it as well, and the right to create productive tension. That, to me, then, is what makes it a partnership. Not just, I can ask you for a discount. I was hoping you'd partner with me for that, or I'm going to ask you for money and I'm hoping you'll partner with me for that. That's,
right.
That becomes the dilution of the term.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked a little bit about, the partnership and other things that were good experiences that you had. What about, and again, you don't have to name any names. I like to call that out ahead of time, as my listeners know and our listeners know. What was an experience you went through where it was just a negative culture experience and you wanted to make sure that didn't happen in MobileLabs? Yeah,
I went through my very first job was a smaller company. I've always worked for smaller companies, but got acquired by a larger company that was really, with all the negative connotations that it used to have but still has, was really backed by private equity. And the negative cultural experience there was not only were customers just a number, but really all the employees were just a number. And, everything became about non-contextualized metrics, poor KPIs. And then the really tragic thing, which was not even having the guts to tell us what they wanted us to do. And what I mean by that is a very specific example. I had fortunately left the organization and gone to the company I just described right before my wedding. Everyone I used to work with in the department said they just came in and mandated, you can move to Texas or you can not work here anymore. And it was that culture of, hey, if you're trying to make your numbers, I'll have the guts to fire me so I can go get severance or whatever else or collect my unemployment. But no, it was the classic, we'll make it so miserable. Some percentile of people will quit under just the horrible onus of all of the rules and regulations, and you never had to do time cards, and now we'll do time cards in 15-minute increments and all of those types of things. It was really that, and it was classic, really, like I said, negative private equity. You know, this new phase of private equity is a lot better. There's people actually believe I'll buy a company and I can make it better. Back then it was Raider and leveraged buyouts and all of those types of things. And that's exactly what it was. So they were just milking our maintenance, making it harder and harder and harder to do our jobs. But, you know, you got it's like Office Space, right? But every now and again you got together and they hung some banner with some BS new thing that they weren't going to enact at all. That's what, you know, to me, that sits with me in terms of poor culture, and then it's non-transparent. Classic ivory towers, you know, CEOs driving big fancy cars, but we're not getting raises every single year. All of those types of things, not valuing the people who generate all of the revenue for the business. To me, those are classic examples, you know, major corporate negative culture.
Yeah, I feel like that's been a theme of talking to multiple other people about kind of PE, private equity. And, you know, I have heard that there's some new ones coming on board, but the classic sense is, you know, milk it for the maintenance, milk it for the money. And I know I've worked with other PE firms over time where, you know, they did feel very interchangeable with the people. Even the executives that came in, they would fly in for a day and then they were gone and then they were hard to reach.
Right.
You know, and it was just interchangeability, and, you know, the culture definitely suffered, at least in the ones that I experienced myself.
Yeah, exactly the same. I mean, you see, being kind of in the startup space, you now have these kind of larger, and I mean, I'll name names here because I think they're good examples. I mean, you see folks like Insight Venture Partners, who's made a whole bunch of investments here in Atlanta, Vista Equity Partners. Some of these folks that are kind of classic, but they'll almost take it from they're almost a full stop shop from venture all the way to fully buyout private equity, and the portfolio is a little broader, and they look at companies and put them together to say, okay, this company needs investment to replace potentially in our portfolio this thing that is sunsetting, but it's sunsetting for the right reasons. It's sunsetting because maybe the technology is old, there's new ways to approach this, the unit economics are poor, and instead of so we'll manage that and have a good customer satisfaction, but at the same time, what we'll do, actually even here in town, I think Infor does this, we'll look for something new to replace that older technology with something more viable. And at least then I still think they're focused on what I care about, which is solving problems for customers. That to me is good culture. You know, hey, they all have problems. Everybody has warts. I run a little tiny company and we still struggle with things. Every single week we're looking at how do we be better? How do we do those types of things? But I think if the approach is I want to solve a problem, and in solving that problem, I'm going to ask for a fair exchange of money, that's great. If it's I'm going to extract as much money out of you as I can absolutely get while I continue to deliver worse and worse and worse service, and eventually you'll stop putting up with me, not so much. And who I was working for was definitely the latter.
Yeah, so you mentioned, you know, working in a small company now, MobileLabs, and going through different iterations and challenges. What are some of the things that you love most about your culture now?
So I think one of the biggest things was my very first job was in customer service. And it's always kind of carried forward with me, that notion of, you know, they've either given me money or I'm asking them to give me money to solve a problem for them. And we are going to put them at the forefront. And for a small company, we compete with some much larger, better funded, bigger companies that have been established a long time. But we continually get feedback on, you guys treat us better than the bigger company absolutely does. Whether you're local or we're far away, we would have no idea that you're a small company in dealing with you. And that's a cultural aspect. We go above and beyond. One of the stories that I tell people when we're looking to hire is, in the very first year of business, our CTO, founding CTO and experienced CTO, this is kind of his, I'll say last rodeo. I almost don't like the term, but we were dealing with a customer out of Australia at 3 o'clock in the morning. He is in our office crawling around solving a problem that they're having, and he's doing it personally. Or in my earliest days, we're trying to get a customer, and I drove, because we have a hardware software solution, appliance-based approach. I drove that to Iowa to meet with a customer, met with them, dealt with it, handled the installation myself, and came back. And the reason is because we think everything requires that level of personal care. I will still get involved in customer support and escalation tickets and all of those types of things. Not because the people beneath me can't do those things. I have good people and I trust them to do that, but because I want to show that above and beyond level of culture that we're willing to go to drive satisfaction. And it's how we've been able to play in the enterprise space since the very beginning of the business, is playing bigger than our weight. And you do that by caring. That's actually the best way to do it. You have to do it by caring and putting the customer at the center of everything that you do.
So with caring at the center of what you guys do in your company culture, what is another example of your culture and kind of your differentiator?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do is everybody, whether your title's customer service or it's sales or whatever else, everybody is in customer service or in customer success even. So whether it's me as the CEO, it is our chief product officer, or chief architect. We just released a new product last year called GigaFox that comes with some new approaches, some new technology we have. So our chief product officer went and did the first 5 installations of that, hands-on, because he's the most familiar with it. He was the original creator of it, and then his team finished it out, making certain that we had smooth, successful implementations of the product for people who took a bet on new technology with us. And it's it's folks like Pokemon, for example, signed up with us. They spoke, so I can use their actual name. We can folks like that. So making sure that we have that level of attention to detail. And then even down, I will say another example, same with the CTO. In our early days, we had someone who hadn't quite bought on to understanding what it meant culturally to put the customer. He flew out, we had an installation, he left and the installation wasn't up and running. And once again, the same CTO personally called and apologized the next day when we found out that happened, without even a salesperson. Just came back and said, oh, well, they're not up and running, there's a few things. He called and said, that's not the way we do business. That is not how we approach things like this, and it'll never happen again. So it's not always just how you do the easy, fun things, it's also how you deal with problems. So and that is sometimes admitting you made a mistake, both internally and externally. I will only ever get upset with you if I find out from somebody else that you screwed up. If you come to me and say, look, I screwed up and here's how I'm fixing it, then to me, that's how you carry forward being willing to make things better.
Yeah, I really feel like a lot of the top companies I've dealt with in Atlanta have service as a differentiator. So like Corey, a friend of mine, Corey over at Gimme Vending, right? You call them, it's 24/7 support. And when you call in, you get a person and it's, their head of support. And, you're getting people immediately on the phone. You're not going through phone trees. You're not going through multiple tiers of support for people asking silly questions that you've probably answered 100 times or know the answer to as a user of the product. I know in the early days before the acquisition, Pardot was the same way. You got them on the phone and their support went above and beyond, as well as, their support team actually proactively went out and tried to train you instead of just being an organization that took in cases all day and tried to work them. So I love the aspect of, using service as a differentiator, and glad to hear that you guys are doing that. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the next step, and you see it from Pardot, but you see it from the legacy folks coming out of like David's company, so like Sales Loft and some of the other people here in town, is the notion of success, right? So now it's a step forward. So customer service or support still a little reactive. Now you have this proactive notion of customer success. And we implemented that about 1.5 years ago, and it's been tremendously, for lack of a better term, successful for us. But one of the things we did here, and I made a real key point to that, is some other people in our space or people in even different spaces, customer success was actually sales in, the sales wolf in sheep's clothing, which is what they would come in and say is, oh, well, what you need to be successful is you need to add component XYZ that you don't own yet. I've personally experienced that, and I'll tell you, it's really, really frustrating. So like my first mandate when we set up customer success was, you guys don't make any money if there's an upsell or anything out of that. And it's not against you, because your job is to just make sure they're happy, make sure they're successful, get them up and running, and you'll never try to cross-sell anything. And that's just to make certain, because I've just known people who said we felt duped. Customer success came in, and all it really was an excuse to have the sales rep call back to me and say, so, how many of these can I get for you? Because clearly the reason you can't succeed is you don't have this component that you didn't know about, or we've created since then, et cetera, et cetera. So that's those are one of the other cultural pieces is, make them successful. That's how they buy more from you. They'll always need more of it if they're using it. So make it easier for them to use it. Figure out how to do those things.
Yeah, most definitely. Make it easier and they will come, right?
Exactly.
So last question I have is about the new year. So we just rolled into 2019 recently. What are you looking to do from a culture perspective, a people perspective, as enhancement or challenge you'd like to overcome for the new year?
Yeah, great point, because we're actually right into talking about this and coming into like our kickoff and all those things, and the leadership team being together. And I think one of the things we're looking at, we still struggle with. It's funny, you talk about Southern companies. There's good and bad somewhat with that. I actually was just talking with someone that we're from the South, so we're all very nice, and that's great externally, but sometimes internally you have to learn how to cultivate a healthy tension and be able to still respectfully be able to tell people, okay, maybe this could be better. We're not performing. We've all been together so long because we're a long-standing company. We haven't had much turnover, which is great, but we're also really close friends. So one of the things that we're working on that's a cultural thing is actually being able to tell people in the appropriate way, I'm disappointed, and this isn't working as well as I would like it to work. And how do we work together to make this work better? Here's a way in which I needed your organization to perform a little bit better to make it easier for my organization. And by the way, here's the thing, I recognize where I could have performed better to make it easier for your group. So we're going to start working on a more holistic approach to figuring those things out. We were a small team. Now we've grown up a bit into some different organizations, and what's happened is we've gotten a little insular, and sometimes we don't always get together and talk about, hey, here's the different areas where we're not helping each other out. So the only way to have that happen, some of this I'm stealing straight from the Sales Loft stuff, but it's talking about how do I have a healthy tension, a productive tension within the organization that drives us to be better? How do we look to drive ourselves to further excellence? I think we were at the Atlanta Tech Village for a long time, so there was one of those posters that says, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. But the corollary to that I've realized some people forget is you can't let good be the enemy of better. So how do I know, okay, this was good last year, how do I make it better? And that happens in tension. That's the only way it can happen. We have to sit down and be willing to say, I'm not getting what I want. How do we make this better? And also be willing to say, I didn't do a good job with this. How can I be better? And maybe I need other people to tell me how to do that.
And so with that tension, right, it sounds very kind of 5 dysfunctions of a team, like that healthy collaboration and contention and things like that. How do you plan to pull that out of the team and make that change happen? So
we've engaged a little bit with a third party to help us kind of come in and look at working a little bit around, for lack of a better term, emotional safe spaces. They call it emotional security is what they talk about. So the ability to sit here and say there's ways to approach talking with each other and making certain that there's a way to have this conversation. Maybe we wait until we calm down. Maybe we head it off at the pass. How do we drive forward and have that type of tension? So we've brought in some people from the outside to sit here and say, okay, we're all hungry for better communication, but somehow we're not making it happen. And when I say it's not happening internally, well, then sometimes you just have to bring in an outsider, bring in some new blood to come in and look at it and say, okay, these are why you guys are actually struggling with talking about that. Or we have we're being passive aggressive. We've let it gone too long, and instead of talking about it when it could be productive, we've let anger get the better of us. And we don't struggle with it too much, but it's just bubbling up. We're getting ready to move through some major milestones as a company. We have a lot of things moving very, very quickly, which is all great. But this is also when some of these challenges happen. So we've actually just decided, let's bring somebody in and have a workshop. Let's all sit down and say, okay, how do we talk? How do we do this? And how can we be better? What are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And what does that mean in terms of engaging with each other? And it includes me. Yeah. I'm more of an inspirational leader type. I'm also myself not always great at confrontation. So how do we get better at those types of things?
Yeah, I know for a lot of our clients, we do personality assessments, which includes, uncovering those strengths and weaknesses, strengths and challenges and struggles for each person. And in looking at that over the years, I've noticed, there's actually an indicator that says ability to communicate directly and candidly, right? And then you put somebody with a high score on that with the opposite score in the same room, and the one who confronts directly and candidly is the one who, thrives on the contention and wants the best idea a lot of times and doesn't mind bringing it up. And then the opposite side, it almost feels like an attack on them. They feel like they're being attacked, and that's a level of communication and trust and transparency that has to be set by these workshops you're talking about.
Exactly. And documenting, one of the things it's time to do is, we've had a mission statement, but they're kind of the old school, do this. It's like, so I want to take a step further and have a value statement. What are the values of the business? Because what that does is it provides a framework by which you can basically operate in a little more tension, because the reason is you have the ability to say, I'm calling BS that we're not operating within the values of the company. And that goes, but part of the point is to say, I want anybody even to be able to call me and say, Dan, I don't think you're actually operating within the values of the business today with this decision that you made, or whatever else happened. I don't know. I have baby brain. I got a 3-week-old. I'm exhausted, and I just have a bad day, right? But it gives ability to people to say, hey, I didn't appreciate that, what happened with that, or you're not acting on behalf of the customer. You're not being an advocate for them. How do we do those types of things? You're holding information. That's one of our big struggles right now. Is we have a lot of very smart people and a lot of people that know stuff, but it's like, how do we get it out of folks? Because if you forget to ask them, they don't necessarily remember to offer it up. So those are the types of things that we're working on as a team to just make us more efficient.
Yeah, well, I love what you're working on. I can't wait to hear more about the outcome and the success of that. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us. This has been the Epic Company Culture Podcast with culture champion Dan McFall of MobileLabs. If you would like to hear more, follow us on our YouTube channel, Epic Company Culture. And if you'd like to hear more on the podcast, follow us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, or iTunes. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.